How do you sleep at night? You probably turn on a fan or maybe a meditation app. You dim the lights, find a comfortable position, and hopefully drift into a peaceful slumber. But have you ever wondered how people slept in ancient Rome? How about the women who worked in the city's underbelly, the ones history has largely forgotten? I'm Golden Chonk, and tonight we're not just dimming the lights. We're stepping into the darkness of a Roman alleyway, turning on a mental fan for a soft hum of historical whispers, and journeying into the surprisingly well-documented and often wildly misunderstood daily life of Roman prostitutes. From cramped, windowless brothels to the surprising laws that governed their lives, we'll uncover the secrets of a profession that was everywhere in Roman society, even as it was endlessly judged. What if I told you that being a sex worker in ancient Rome meant wearing a specific outfit, paying taxes, and even having your name and reviews immortalized on city walls? Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of Roman society to reveal the hidden truths of those who lived and worked in the shadows. We'll also explore the lives of Viking healers, the story of Joan of Arc, the dangerous world of medieval bakers, and so much more. If you like this story, please give it a like and share with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to Golden Chonk channel for more inspiring stories like this one. So get comfortable, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're starting with the forgotten women of Rome. 1. The daily grind of a Roman prostitute. You wake up, or more accurately, you regain consciousness, in a space barely large enough to turn around without elbowing a wall. Congratulations, you live in a cellar, the ancient Roman version of a work-from-home setup. If your home was a broom closet and your job required body oil. These rooms were standard issue for many of Rome's working women. Located in brothels, lupanars, or stacked above taverns and bathhouses, they were tiny, windowless chambers that doubled as both living quarters and workspace. Think of it as a studio apartment designed by someone who hates light, air, and privacy. Your mattress is straw-stuffed, possibly shared with fleas, and smells faintly of wine, smoke, and disappointment. If you're lucky, there's a small oil lamp. And if you're really lucky, it hasn't been stolen. Your few possessions, some cheap makeup, a comb, and maybe a bronze mirror if times are good, are shoved into the corner like they too are tired of being here. There's no running water, no plumbing, and a bucket you try not to think about. Bathing will be a group activity later at the nearest public bathhouse, where the water is communal and the awkward eye contact is free. But there's no time to lounge because your room is also your office, and business hours are whenever someone knocks or barges in or yells through the door. Privacy is a modern concept. Here in Rome, walls are suggestions and doors are decorative. Most days begin with a quick clean-up of the room, sweeping out yesterday's dust, wine stains, and any lost sandals left behind by last night's visitors. Then comes the prep: face powder, rouge, and enough perfume to qualify as flammable. You're not trying to smell good, you're trying to smell better than the guy in line behind you. You practice your best sultry half smile in the bronze mirror, not because it works, but because pretending helps. A customer once described you as charmingly awake, and you're still riding the emotional high from that, because here in the cellar, every day begins the same: cramped, rushed, and filled with just enough dignity to make it to lunchtime. 2. Hygiene and appearance in ancient Rome. After waking up in your glorified broom closet, it's time to prepare for another day of impressing clients and surviving public judgment. But first, hygiene, or what passed for it in ancient Rome. There is, of course, no private bathroom. That luxury is reserved for the wealthy, and even they just had pots with ambition. As a working woman in a city that worships marble statues but accepts open sewers, your best option is the nearest public fountain or bathhouse, depending on your mood and tolerance for awkward nudity. If you're pressed for time, and let's face it, you usually are, you go for the quick rinse at the communal fountain. You splash some water on your face, rinse out your mouth with wine if you're fancy, and hope the fountain hasn't been used to clean a chicken that morning. There's no soap, but maybe you've got a bit of natron, a salty cleaning powder that exfoliates your skin and your self-esteem. If business is slow and coins are jangling in your little purse, you might splurge on a visit to the public baths, the great Roman equalizer. Everyone's there, merchants, soldiers, philosophers, and that guy who talks too loudly about his hemorrhoids. You undress, store your belongings in a niche you trust way too easily, and wade into tepid water full of floating philosophical debates and someone else's toenail. Inside, you sweat in the steam room, scrape yourself with a strigil, a curved metal blade, and enjoy a brief moment of being the cleanest person on your street, a title that lasts about 5 minutes. After the bath, you dry off, apply more perfume, and try to remember if anyone's invented deodorant yet. They haven't. To finish the look, a bit of chalk-based face powder, a hint of rouge for the cheeks and lips, and kohl around the eyes. The makeup isn't to highlight your beauty, but to hide the fatigue. Clients don't want to see the woman who's already dealt with 3 senators and a sailor before noon. They want mystery, allure, and someone who doesn't smell like old lentils. 3. The professional uniform and marketing. Now that you're washed, or at least convincingly perfumed, it's time to get dressed. While Roman society had a lot of complicated opinions about fashion, there was one outfit that made things very clear. The female toga. Yes, a toga. That flowing white garment we usually associate with senators, emperors, and frat parties. But here's the twist. In Rome, a woman wearing a toga wasn't making a political statement. She was making a professional one. It was a visual billboard for, I'm not a respectable matron, and I am available for negotiation. Proper Roman women wore the stola, a long, layered dress that said, my husband controls my dowry, and I go to bed at 9. Prostitutes, on the other hand, were denied the stola by law and required to wear a toga, often short, brightly coloured, and intentionally flashy. Think less Grecian goddess, more visible from across the forum. The look was usually accessorized with cheap jewelry, bronze or glass beads, maybe some loud earrings. The goal wasn't elegance, it was visibility. When you're competing with 20 other women in a 100-meter radius, subtlety is a luxury you can't afford. Footwear was likely simple sandals, or maybe even barefoot, depending on location and budget. Comfort wasn't a priority. You're going to spend a lot of the day standing, walking, and occasionally sprinting away from a bad client or an overzealous moralist. Hair was its own ordeal. Roman prostitutes often curled and dyed their hair, sometimes wearing wigs, especially blonde ones imported from Gaul. Blonde hair had a certain exotic appeal in Rome, kind of like imported luxury soap, only more alive. And let's not forget the finishing touches, makeup. Pale face powder to contrast with red lips and cheeks, and thick kohl eyeliner to make your eyes pop. Or at least look less sleep-deprived. Once fully dressed, you looked obvious. And that was the point. In a city of 1 million people, your outfit was your business card. If it made you look bold, scandalous, and economically available, then congratulations. You were ready for another glorious day of being judged by society while being actively funded by it. 4. The business of sex work. So you're dressed, painted, perfumed, and hopefully not too hungover. Now comes the fun part, drumming up business in a city where everyone wants sex but pretends they're shocked when they find out it's for sale. In ancient Rome, marketing wasn't subtle. There were no pamphlets, no websites, and definitely no branding consultants. If you wanted clients, you had to be seen, be loud, or be immortalized in graffiti. Preferably all 3. Let's start with location strategy. If you worked out of a lupanar or brothel, your office was already built for visibility. Brothels were often located near bathhouses, markets, or drinking establishments. Anywhere people might already be sweaty, bored, or easily persuaded. Think of it as ancient foot traffic optimization. Standing in the doorway, wearing your finest look at me outfit, you'd call out to passers-by with a mixture of flattery, negotiation, and time-sensitive offers. 2 denarii if you're quick. Hey, it might sound desperate, but rent was due, and the next girl over just dropped her rate to 1. If you were freelance, it was all about roaming visibility. You might hover near temples, because nothing says divine inspiration like temptation, or hang around taverns, ready to flirt with a tipsy legionary who still had some coin left and questionable judgment. But perhaps the most bizarre and weirdly effective form of Roman advertising was wall graffiti. Yes, Pompeii has immortalized the genius of ancient street marketing. Brothel walls were plastered with handwritten reviews like, "Maritimus gave me the best time of my life," or "Felicia, 2 denarii, very fast service." These weren't just vandalism, they were ancient Yelp, unfiltered, unregulated, and very, very public. Some women even paid someone to write their name and specialty somewhere visible, usually near tavern entrances or on columns. Others let their clients do the writing, which, as you might expect, ranged from glowing praise to confused haikus about being robbed. All this made one thing clear: a prostitute's survival depended as much on marketing as on skill. If people didn't know your name, your rates, and your approximate level of enthusiasm, someone else was getting the business. Because in ancient Rome, as now, the secret to success wasn't always talent. Sometimes it was just better PR. 5. Pricing, payment, and the tax man. So you've advertised yourself, you've got the eyeliner, and just enough confidence to fake a good mood. Now it's time to talk pricing, the part where ancient Rome pretends to be a free market while secretly judging you anyway. Let's be clear, there was no union. Rates were set by supply, demand, and whatever you could get away with before someone bartered you down with a loaf of stale bread. For street-level workers or those in lower-end lupanars, prices could be as low as 1 or 2 asses, a small bronze coin that wouldn't even get you a glass of wine. That's right, some clients were paying less than the cost of a decent lunch. If that feels depressing, remember, some women accepted food, sandals, or even promises as payment. Yes, in a city with an empire's worth of coinage, IOUs still existed. On the other hand, high-end prostitutes, often called meretrices, operated more like luxury brands. These women could charge in denarii, silver coins, sometimes multiple per client, especially if they had skills beyond the bedroom. Conversation, music, poetry, basic literacy, anything that let a client believe they weren't hiring company, but taste. Some prostitutes even had niches, not architectural ones, but marketing ones. Maybe you specialized in working with sailors, or performing erotic dances, or reciting poetry during the act. Don't laugh, Ovid probably inspired someone. The more unique your brand, the less replaceable you became. Repeat clients might get a discount, or not. It depended entirely on whether they paid on time or smelled like fermented cabbage. And if you worked under a pimp or brothel owner, a hefty cut of your earnings disappeared before you saw a single coin. Some women were enslaved, which meant they didn't get paid at all, just food, shelter, and a vague promise that one day they might buy their freedom if they somehow won the Roman lottery. And if you thought the life of a Roman prostitute was already tough, allow us to introduce your least favorite client, the Roman tax collector. Yes, the Roman Empire, brilliant engineers, conquerors of the known world, also managed to tax sex work. It was called the vectigul ex capturis, and it ensured that even your most awkward encounters contributed to Rome's public infrastructure. Congratulations, your nightly services just funded another aqueduct. The tax wasn't just unofficial pocket skimming either. This was a state-sanctioned system managed by professional collectors known as publicani, men who were somehow both boring and terrifying. They kept detailed records, demanded payment in cash, and probably judged your perfume choices while scribbling on their wax tablets. To legally operate, prostitutes had to register with the aedles, the Roman equivalent of a city inspector with an affinity for paperwork and moral superiority. Upon registration, you were entered into an official list of sex workers. Think of it as joining a trade union, except there were no benefits, and instead of a card, you got a branding, literally. Yes, some sex workers, especially enslaved ones, were branded or tattooed with marks like Lupa or their owner's name. The branding wasn't for clients. It was to ensure you couldn't pretend to be respectable later. The tax rate varied depending on location, class, and whether your clients were sad senators or discount gladiators. But it always stung. You paid per act or per week, and there was no deduction for emotional labour, uncomfortable silences, or existential dread. 6. The locations of Roman prostitution. Not every Roman prostitute worked in a lupanar. Some preferred, or were assigned to, the equally glamorous world of taverns. If the brothel was a chaotic office cubicle, the tavern was more like working in an open-air startup, with more vomit and fewer stock options. Taverns, or colpini, were where Rome's finest drunkards, merchants, off-duty soldiers, and guys named Gaius with gambling debts gathered to drink, shout, and pretend they understood Virgil. For prostitutes working here, the motto was simple: serve the wine, sell the charm, dodge the gropes. A typical shift involved pouring watered-down wine into dirty cups for people who wouldn't notice the difference anyway. With your other hand, you flirted just enough to keep the denarii flowing, but not so much that a brawl broke out. Unless that brawl was entertaining, in which case, carry on. Unlike the brothel, taverns were technically food establishments, so you had the delightful backdrop of boiled cabbage, fish sauce, and body odour. Some women worked the back rooms or upstairs areas, making the tavern a part-time brothel with table service. Others kept things more casual, offering company, lap-sitting, and heavily suggestive compliments like, "Your toga looks clean." This was high praise in Rome. For the entrepreneurial spirit with no brothel affiliation and too much confidence, there was always the street. Freelance prostitution in Rome meant walking the line between independent contractor and please don't arrest me. Prostitutes who worked outdoors were called prostibuli, and they roamed the alleys, bathhouse entrances, marketplaces, and occasionally temple steps, because nothing says divine intervention like offering a discount outside a shrine to Venus. Daylight hours were decent for traffic, but risky. You had to navigate gawking citizens, nosy magistrates, and angry matrons who thought your existence was ruining their husband's self-control. Spoiler, it wasn't. You dressed brightly to stand out, with short tunics, flashy jewellery, and maybe a wig made from imported German hair. It was less understated elegance, more visible from across the Circus Maximus. The goal was to catch a client's eye before his wife caught him. 7. Occupational hazards and social stigma. Working as a Roman prostitute came with certain occupational hazards, namely disease, injury, and whatever that thing was the sailor from Brundisium left behind. Welcome to the health and wellness chapter, where the only prescription is hope you survive. Let's begin with the big one, venereal disease. Ancient Rome didn't have germ theory, but they did know that some men left you with more than a coin purse and a bad poem. There are Roman texts that describe symptoms ranging from persistent itching to things falling off that shouldn't. The medical advice? Usually a mix of vinegar washes, herbal ointments, and desperate prayers to Venus. Pregnancy was another ever-present concern. There was no birth control pill, but there were options if you had the guts and the budget. Prostitutes used natural contraceptives like silphium, an extinct plant famously over-harvested for this exact reason. They also used animal intestines as crude condoms and wool tampons soaked in herbal concoctions. If pregnancy occurred, things got complicated. Some women carried to term and raised their children, often within the brothel itself. Others gave infants up to foundling homes, or worse, the open streets. Infanticide wasn't legal, but turning a blind eye was practically a civic duty. And let's not forget the emotional toll. Depression, trauma, anxiety, all part of the job. Rome didn't have therapists. You had fellow prostitutes, wine, and the occasional stray cat who listened without judgment. In a city where divine intervention was blamed for everything from floods to flatulence, prostitutes weren't just dodging moral judgment. They were also trying to stay on the God's good side. Prostitution was tolerated by the law, taxed, regulated, and even registered, but that didn't stop every senator, priest, and bored philosopher from telling you how much they disapproved of you, often while zipping up their tunic. This was the work of the moral police, a vast, unpaid network of elites who believed it was their divine duty to shame you while enjoying the fruits of your labor behind closed doors. 8. The divine and the demonic. In the Roman world of sex work, you were not only dodging moral judgment, but also trying to stay on the good side of the gods. Religion in Rome was a full-time job, and the gods were always watching, judging, occasionally cursing. But the divine pantheon had a few deities who were, let's say, more lenient toward your profession. First, there was Venus, goddess of love, beauty, and general poor decision-making. Many prostitutes dedicated small altars to her in their rooms, making offerings of flowers, perfume, or a coin in hopes of attracting wealth, charm, or at the very least, clients who didn't smell like boiled goat. Then came Fortuna, goddess of luck. Given how random your daily income was, ranging from a gold bracelet to 3 moldy grapes and a promise, Fortuna was kind of a big deal. You might wear a charm bearing her likeness, or mumble a quick prayer before a customer with too many rings and suspiciously clean sandals walked in. But religion wasn't all glitter and flirtation. The darker side of belief included superstition, omens, and magical countermeasures. Because when in doubt, blame the spirits. You'd burn incense to ward off the evil eye, tie red cords around your ankle for protection, or hire a professional witch to curse a rival prostitute's hairline. Don't laugh. Cursed tablets, called depictions, have been found all over Roman brothel districts, many reading like ancient Yelp revenge reviews. May her tongue rot, may her clients dry up, may she trip in the street and land in donkey dung. If you were enslaved, you might also pray to Mercury, the god of commerce and transactions, because your life was one long receipt. And if you were lucky enough to save up for freedom, Libertas, the goddess of liberty, got a private altar and a slightly more expensive candle. All this spiritual effort wasn't just tradition, it was survival with flair. When Rome gave you judgment, disease, and rude senators, the gods were your HR department, mostly useless, occasionally helpful, and always accepting offerings. 9. Love, life, and old age. Love in the Roman world of prostitution was complicated. At best, it was a pleasant delusion, and at worst, a financial liability in a tunic. Clients fell in love all the time, or claimed they did, usually after 3 cups of wine and half a monologue about their mother. Some were sincere, some were drunk, and some were just trying to get a discount. But baby, I'm different, they'd say, clutching your hand like a tragic poet. And you'd nod politely, mentally calculating how much they still owed you. Emotional labor was part of the package. For a few clients, you might even develop something real, attachment, affection, or just mutual exhaustion. But more often than not, romance was a dangerous distraction, especially when you remembered that Rome legally categorized you as infames, meaning you could not legally marry a citizen even if you wanted to. There were tales of prostitutes who fell in love with their regulars, who were promised freedom and a house with a garden, only to end up abandoned the moment another woman with better eyeliner walked by. Among fellow prostitutes, however, real bonds were more likely. You worked side by side, endured the same insults, shared the same lice. Some of these friendships became sisterhoods, others became quiet romantic partnerships hidden beneath the radar of Roman patriarchy. And of course, there were lies you told yourself, that one day you'd quit, that your best client really would take you away, that if you could just save a little more, you'd open a perfume shop in Ostia and never look back. Maybe it wasn't true, but in Rome, everyone had a fantasy. Yours just came with better lighting and lower expectations. In the Roman world of sex work, beauty was currency and youth was the exchange rate. So what happened when the blush wore off, the client stopped lingering, and your joints started popping louder than your earrings? Simple, you aged out. But you didn't disappear. Some women, having saved carefully or miraculously had a client with both money and follow-through, managed to buy their freedom if they were enslaved and start over. The luckiest opened taverns or bathhouses, renting out rooms to the next generation of desperate optimists. Others became madams, or linii, the brothel version of upper management. Less action, more shouting. As a leaner, you didn't need to be young or pretty. You needed to be sharp, intimidating, and fluent in threats involving sandals and overdue debts. You ran the schedules, kept the books, and made sure the curtains were only mildly horrifying. Some retired sex workers leaned into fortune-telling after all, When you've heard every confession and watched every mistake walk through the door, predicting doom becomes second nature. A few became unofficial therapists, wise women, or herbalists, offering advice laced with sarcasm and slightly incorrect medical suggestions. But many simply kept working because Rome wasn't in the habit of offering pensions to women who'd spent 2 decades in a toga. Older prostitutes still had clients. They just adjusted their marketing, less blushing flower, more experienced, discreet, and tolerates poetry. But for those with no savings, no patrons, and no lucky breaks, the options weren't kind. You begged, you cleaned temples, you worked in laundries until your hands turned into shriveled olives. Rome didn't care how you got old, only that you did so quietly. But here's the truth they didn't carve into marble. For many, survival itself was the achievement. And if you made it to old age with your wit intact and at least one working sandal, you were already a legend. 10. The unsung legacy. When people think of ancient Rome, they picture marble statues, grand speeches, and emperors with questionable family trees. What they rarely picture is the woman leaning in a brothel doorway, adjusting her wig, and mentally calculating how many coins she needs to not starve next week. Roman prostitutes didn't just work in the shadows. They've been kept there by history, carefully edited out of the noble narrative so school children could learn about aqueducts without asking uncomfortable questions. Yet they were everywhere, in graffiti, legal records, satire, poems, love letters, curse tablets, and receipts. They were a fixture of daily Roman life, even as society treated them like morally contagious wallpaper. What history usually gets wrong is the assumption that these women were powerless victims or morally bankrupt seductresses. In reality, many were savvy, adaptable, and, dare we say, better at business than half the Senate. They knew how to read a client, negotiate terms, avoid danger, and hustle a living in a city that cheered gladiators and stoned anyone who wore the wrong shoes. They weren't all the same. Some were enslaved, some free. Some catered to the wealthy, others to whoever had 2 coins and bad breath. Some hated every second, others carved out small corners of power and routine. Most existed somewhere in between, like everyone else in Rome, pretending they weren't tired. Their stories were rarely written by them. Instead, they were remembered by poets looking for metaphors, by moralists clutching their pearls, or by archaeologists piecing together Pompeii's raciest wall scribbles. But here's what's remarkable. They're still visible. In stone carvings, in sarcastic graffiti, in laws and loopholes, and offhand mentions in love poems. These women were erased from respectability, but not from reality. They worked, they laughed, they scammed, they wept, and they endured. All without marble statues or gilded tombs, just faint ink on a crumbling wall. So the next time someone waxes poetic about the glory of Rome, remember, behind every toga-clad philosopher was a working girl keeping the economy and the gossip alive. 11. The Viking healers and their herbs. In the world of the Vikings, warfare was a constant presence, and with it came injuries. Deep cuts from swords, axe wounds, broken bones, and burns from fire and frost. On the battlefield or back in the village, it was the lechnia, the healer, who was called upon to treat the wounded. These individuals were respected members of society, combining the practical knowledge of herbs with the spiritual traditions of Norse belief. Among the most trusted herbs in a Viking healer's collection was yarrow, Achillea millefolium. Known for its ability to staunch bleeding, yarrow was used widely across northern Europe. Viking healers would crush the leaves and apply them directly to wounds, either alone or mixed into a poultice. Yarrow acted as a coagulant, helping to stop blood flow and prevent infection. It was believed to possess sacred properties, with legends connecting its power to Odin himself. The preparation of such remedies was both methodical and rooted in cultural ritual. The healer might wash the wound with boiled water infused with antiseptic herbs, apply crushed yarrow, and bind the area tightly with linen or animal skin strips. In some cases, chants or prayers were recited during the process, invoking protection or healing from the gods. Beyond battlefield wounds, yarrow was used internally as well. A tea made from its flowers and leaves could reduce fevers, ease digestive complaints, or help relieve menstrual cramps. It was a versatile plant, and one that could be found growing throughout the Viking homelands, in fields, near rivers, or in small garden plots maintained by women of the household. Healers in Viking society had a deep understanding of their environment. They knew which plants grew in which seasons, how to harvest them properly, and how to preserve them for use during the long, dark winters. This knowledge was passed down through generations, often from mother to daughter, or from elder to apprentice. In a world without hospitals or modern antibiotics, the skill of the healer and the power of plants like yarrow were essential to survival and to maintaining strength in a warrior-driven culture. 12. Angelica, the spiritual remedy. While yarrow addressed bleeding and surface wounds, the Viking healers' battle against infection required deeper remedies. One of the most revered herbs in this regard was Angelica, Angelica archangelica, a tall aromatic plant with hollow stalks and umbrella-shaped clusters of greenish-white flowers. It thrived in the cold climates of Scandinavia and was considered so valuable that it was cultivated in monastery gardens long after the Viking Age ended. Angelica held a central place in early Northern European medicine, prized for its broad-spectrum medicinal properties. Viking healers used the root, leaves, and seeds to prepare a variety of treatments. Most commonly, the root was dried and then steeped into decoctions to fight internal infections. It was known for its warming effect on the body and was used to stimulate circulation, cleanse the blood, and reduce inflammation. The antiseptic properties of Angelica were vital in treating infected wounds, especially those that had been neglected or exposed to dirt and decay. A healer might grind the root and mix it with animal fat or beeswax to create a salve, then apply it to festering injuries. When ingested as a tea or tincture, Angelica helped combat respiratory infections, fevers, and digestive issues, ailments that could become life-threatening in a time without antibiotics. But Angelica's power extended beyond physical healing. In Norse cosmology, certain plants were believed to carry divine energy. The name Angelica itself, though Latin in origin, echoes the spiritual reverence surrounding the plant. While Viking belief systems were different from Christianized Europe, they too held that some plants were gifts from the gods. It is likely that Angelica, with its strong scent and dramatic appearance, was associated with protection and sacred power. Women, who often served as herbalists within the household, used Angelica to treat gynecological conditions. It was thought to regulate menstrual cycles and ease childbirth, a dangerous and sacred moment in Norse society. Because of its reputation as a purifier, Angelica was also used in smoke rituals to cleanse homes and ward off disease during times of illness. 13. Birch sap, the seasonal tonic. As spring arrived in the Viking world, it brought with it one of the most vital remedies for fever and fatigue: birch sap. The birch tree, widespread across Scandinavia, was more than just a source of wood. It was a living pharmacy. Vikings tapped the tree in early spring, collecting the clear, slightly sweet sap as it rose from the roots to nourish new leaves. This seasonal practice required skill and timing, as the sap could only be harvested for a short period before the tree fully awakened. Healers used birch sap as a tonic for those weakened by long winters, illness, or lingering fevers. It was served fresh or fermented into a lightly alcoholic drink known for its revitalizing qualities. Rich in minerals, electrolytes, and natural sugars, birch sap helped rehydrate the body and restore lost energy, especially after the depletion caused by sickness or extended fasting. In an era without formal nutrition science, Viking healers recognized the restorative power of this gift from nature. In cases of fever, healers often paired birch sap with infusions of cooling herbs such as meadowsweet or elderflower. This gentle combination helped bring down body temperature while nourishing the patient. In more serious cases, the sap might be mixed with bitter herbs like wormwood to purge the body of what was believed to be harmful humours. Beyond its internal uses, the birch tree had a role in external treatments too. The bark, when boiled, produced a tar-like substance with antiseptic properties. It was used to treat skin infections, minor burns, and bites. Birch leaves were also used in poultices and steam baths to draw out toxins from the body, often accompanied by prayer or ritual. Symbolically, the birch tree represented renewal and purity. It was often the first tree to grow after land was cleared or burned, and this regenerative quality made it sacred in both Germanic and Norse traditions. The use of its sap in healing reflected this belief, returning vitality to the sick and offering the promise of recovery after hardship. 14. Juniper and meadowsweet. In Viking herbal medicine, juniper was revered for its powerful cleansing properties, both physical and spiritual. Growing abundantly in the rocky soils of Scandinavia, juniper bushes with their prickly needles and aromatic berries were among the most trusted tools in a healer's repertoire. Whether burned, boiled, or brewed, juniper was used to purify the body, the air, and even the spirit. Juniper berries were commonly used as a diuretic and a remedy for urinary tract infections. When consumed as a tea or decoction, they stimulated kidney function, helping the body to flush out excess water and harmful substances. This made them especially useful during illnesses that involved swelling, bloating, or lingering fevers. The berries also had mild antiseptic properties, allowing them to address infections from within. For respiratory issues, juniper smoke played a vital role. Healers would burn dried juniper branches and let the smoke fill a room or a tent, believing it could drive out disease. This wasn't just symbolic. The antimicrobial compounds in juniper smoke helped disinfect the air. During outbreaks of sickness or after a death, Viking homes and ships might be cleansed in this way. In steam baths and sweat lodges, a tradition shared across many northern European cultures, juniper branches were sometimes laid on the hot stones or added to the water. As the vapor rose, it carried the sharp, invigorating scent of the plant, opening the lungs and inducing heavy sweating. This was thought to cleanse the body of toxins and the soul of imbalance. Juniper also held ritual importance. Branches might be hung over doorways to ward off evil, or carried in small bundles by travelers for protection. Among the many herbs known to Viking healers, meadowsweet, Philopendula ulmaraya, was particularly valued for its ability to ease pain and reduce inflammation. Found in damp meadows and along riverbanks, this fragrant plant with creamy white flowers was a staple in early Germanic and Norse herbal medicine. Though they lacked modern terminology, Viking healers recognized that some plants had the power to cool fevers, relieve discomfort, and help the body recover more gently. Meadowsweet was often used to treat headaches, joint pain, and digestive problems. The flowers and leaves were dried and steeped into teas, which were given to patients suffering from fevers or general aches. The herb's soothing effects made it an essential remedy during times of illness and recovery. Unbeknownst to the Vikings, meadowsweet contains compounds similar to salicylic acid, the basis for modern aspirin. This natural pain-relieving ability explains why it was so effective and frequently used. Healers didn't know the chemistry, but they knew the results: less fever, reduced swelling, and relief from discomfort. For digestive issues, meadowsweet was considered a gentle treatment for nausea, heartburn, and stomach cramps. The plant's sweet scent also made it a comforting addition to healing rituals. 15. Mugwort, garlic, and nettle. Mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, held a special place in the Viking healer's practice, not only as a medicinal herb, but also as a spiritual tool. Known across northern Europe for its bitter aroma and silvery leaves, mugwort was considered one of the most sacred plants in Germanic tradition. For Viking societies, where healing was never just physical, mugwort served as a bridge between the body, the mind, and the unseen world. Medicinally, mugwort was used to treat a wide range of ailments. It helped with digestive problems, menstrual irregularities, and fatigue. Viking women in particular relied on mugwort to regulate their cycles and aid with childbirth. Mugwort also had powerful nervine properties, meaning it calmed the nervous system. For warriors who experienced restlessness or nightmares, mugwort tea or smoke was thought to restore inner balance and protect the mind. Sleep, which was often disturbed after battle or illness, could be coaxed back by burning dried mugwort near the bedside or placing it under the pillow. Beyond its medicinal uses, mugwort was strongly linked to ritual and magic. Viking healers and wise women, often referred to as valur or seidkunur, used mugwort in ceremonies to invoke dreams, protection, or visions. The rising smoke was believed to carry prayers to the gods or ward off harmful spirits. Among the most practical and powerful remedies in the Viking healers' collection was garlic, Allium sativum. Though not native to Scandinavia, garlic had long been traded across Europe and may have reached the Viking world through early contact with the British Isles, Frankish territories, and Eastern markets. Its strong scent and potent medicinal qualities made it an essential part of early Norse medicine, especially for infections, parasites, and against disease. Garlic's antibacterial and antifungal properties were well known, even if not scientifically understood. Viking healers used crushed garlic in poultices to clean wounds and prevent festering, particularly important for injuries sustained during battle or travel. Though painful, this treatment was effective in preventing deeper infections in a time when even minor wounds could turn deadly. Internally, garlic was often eaten raw, pounded into pastes, or brewed into strong infusions. It was believed to strengthen the immune system, purify the blood, and warm the body during illness. In the Viking Age, the stinging nettle, Urtica dioica, was more than a nuisance. It was a plant of power. Despite its painful sting, nettle was one of the most useful and respected herbs in Norse healing traditions. It grew abundantly in meadows, forest edges, and near settlements, making it easily accessible to healers and households alike. Nettle was used primarily to treat conditions related to blood and vitality. Viking healers prepared nettle teas or broths to combat fatigue, iron deficiency, and overall weakness. Rich in iron, calcium, and vitamin C, nettle acted as a natural tonic, especially important during long winters when fresh food was scarce and illness spread easily. The practice of urtication, striking sore limbs with fresh nettle stalks, was used to stimulate circulation and relieve arthritis or muscle stiffness. Though painful, it was believed to bring warmth and life back to cold or stiff areas of the body. 16. Joan of Arc, from peasant to prophet. In the winter of 1412, a peasant girl named Joan of Arc was born in the rural village of Domremy, a quiet hamlet in northeastern France. Her family lived modestly, relying on farming to survive. She was not taught to read or write, like most girls of her class, but she was known for her hard work and deep religious devotion from an early age. Her world was humble and steeped in faith. At the age of 13, Joan's life changed forever. She later testified that in the summer of 1425, while alone in her father's garden, she experienced a vision, accompanied by a voice that seemed to come from beyond this world. The voice, surrounded by a dazzling light, was accompanied by the appearance of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. The message was clear but extraordinary. She was chosen by God to help save France. Her divine mission was to drive the English out of French territory and to ensure the coronation of Charles the Dauphin as the rightful king of France. By 1428, the political and military situation in France had worsened. The English had captured much of northern France, and the city of Orleans, a key stronghold, was under siege. Joan, now 16, believed the time had come to act. She travelled to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs and requested an audience with the local commander, Robert de Baudricourt, claiming she had a message for the king. At first, he and his men laughed her off. The teenage girl, claiming divine guidance, was hardly taken seriously. But Joan was persistent. Eventually, after hearing reports of her piety and learning that she had predicted a military setback in Orleans, Baudricourt relented. He agreed to send her, dressed in men's clothing and under armed escort, to meet the Dauphin. 17. The King and the Siege. In early 1429, Joan of Arc arrived in Chinon, where Charles, the uncrowned Dauphin of France, held his court. The journey had been long and dangerous. She travelled more than 300 miles through enemy territory, dressed as a man to avoid attention and assault. When she finally stood before the royal court, she was met with skepticism and curiosity. Charles, unsure of her motives and wary of trickery, decided to test her. To begin, he disguised himself in plain clothes and hid among his courtiers. Joan, having never seen him before, immediately picked him out and addressed him directly. Witnesses were astonished. Still cautious, Charles ordered that Joan be examined by theologians and church officials in Poitiers. For several weeks, she was questioned about her visions, her morality, and her doctrine. She was a teenage girl being grilled by learned men, yet she answered with composure and confidence. Her virginity was even tested, as it was believed her purity was essential for her divine mission. The examiners found nothing heretical in her claims and noted her remarkable character and intelligence. The court's advisors concluded she could be sent to Orléans with the army. With the city of Orléans under siege by the English for several months, its fall would have opened the way to the heart of France. Then, Joan of Arc arrived. She entered the city on April 29th, met by cheering crowds who believed her to be a miracle sent by God. Clad in white armor and riding a white horse, she quickly became a symbol of hope and divine favor. Her presence reinvigorated the French troops and citizens alike. Though she had no formal military training, Joan spoke with boldness and authority, urging immediate action against the English fortifications. Over the course of a week, the French launched a series of offensives to break the siege. Joan wielded not just her sword, but her banner, rallying the troops with cries of faith and purpose. She was wounded during the assault on the fortress of Les Tourelles, shot in the shoulder by an arrow. Refusing to retreat, she returned to the field after having the wound dressed, continuing to urge the men forward. On May 8th, the English finally lifted the siege and withdrew. It was a stunning victory, one that changed the momentum of the war. 18. Coronation and capture. With the siege of Orléans lifted, Joan of Arc's mission shifted toward a far more symbolic objective: the coronation of Charles the Dauphin. In her visions, this was not merely a political event, it was a divine command. Charles needed to be crowned at Reims, the traditional site where French kings were anointed with sacred oil. But Reims was deep in territory controlled by the Burgundians, allies of the English. To reach it, Joan and the French army would have to march through hostile lands. After several victories along the Loire Valley, momentum was on their side. By July 1429, Joan and the royal court set out on what would later be called the coronation journey. Along the way, cities and castles opened their gates without resistance. On July 16th, the French forces reached Reims. The next day, inside the Cathedral of Reims, Charles was crowned King Charles VII of France. Joan stood beside him, holding her banner high. For her, it was the fulfillment of the prophecy she had received from her voices. After the coronation at Reims, Joan of Arc pushed for a bold new objective: the liberation of Paris, still under English and Burgundian control. But not everyone shared her urgency. King Charles VII, newly crowned and politically cautious, hesitated. Eventually, Charles agreed to an assault on Paris, though without full commitment. Joan arrived outside the city in early September 1429 and prepared for battle. On September 8th, she led an assault on the Porte Saint-Honoré, one of the city's main gates. The fighting was fierce, and Joan was struck by a crossbow bolt in the thigh. She continued to direct the battle, but the attack stalled. With nightfall approaching and casualties rising, Charles's commanders ordered a retreat against Joan's protests. The failed attack on Paris marked a turning point, and Joan's influence over royal policy started to wane. In the spring of 1430, Joan continued her campaign, though her position had grown increasingly precarious. On May 23rd, she led a small force in a sortie to challenge the besiegers of Compiègne. As the battle unfolded, French forces were pushed back. Joan remained behind to cover the retreat, but the city gates closed too soon. Surrounded by Burgundian cavalry, she fought until she was pulled from her horse and taken captive. Her capture was a devastating blow for the morale of the French people. The Burgundians held Joan for months before selling her to the English for a large sum. The English viewed her not only as a military adversary, but as a dangerous symbol of resistance. 19. Trial, martyrdom, and legacy. After months in Burgundian custody, Joan of Arc was transferred to English hands and brought to Rouen. There, beginning in January 1431, she faced a formal ecclesiastical trial, not as a prisoner of war, but as a heretic. The trial was orchestrated by the English, but carried out by a panel of pro-English French clergy, led by Bishop Pierre Chonk. Its true goal was not justice, but the destruction of Joan's legacy. Joan was held in a secular prison, guarded by male soldiers, a direct violation of church law. She was denied access to legal counsel, threatened with torture, and interrogated repeatedly. Despite being a 19-year-old peasant girl, she defended herself with remarkable intelligence and composure. Over the course of several months, she was questioned about her visions, her clothing, and her role in the war. The judges focused especially on her claim to divine voices and her habit of wearing men's clothing, an act considered both heretical and unnatural by church standards. Despite their pressure, Joan remained firm in her testimony. Joan was eventually condemned for heresy, based largely on her refusal to renounce her visions and her insistence on wearing male attire. Her sentence was death. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was led to the marketplace in Rouen, tied to a wooden stake and burned alive. She was just 19 years old. As the flames rose, she reportedly called out the name of Jesus repeatedly and asked for a cross to be held before her eyes. A soldier, moved by her courage, handed her a small wooden cross. Her execution was meant to be final, a warning, a silencing of a dangerous symbol. But it had the opposite effect. Joan became a martyr. In 1456, 25 years after her death, Joan's trial was declared invalid, and she was officially exonerated, her name cleared of heresy. In the centuries that followed, Joan of Arc became a unifying symbol for France. During times of national crisis, her story was invoked as a beacon of courage, patriotism, and divine mission. In 1920, nearly 500 years after her execution, the Catholic Church formally canonized Joan of Arc as a saint. The girl who had been condemned by church officials was now one of its most revered figures. Today, her life story, peasant, prophet, warrior, prisoner, saint, defies every expectation. Through faith and conviction, she altered the course of a kingdom. Through fire, she entered legend, and through memory, she lives on. 20. The life of a medieval baker. The life of a medieval baker began in darkness. Long before roosters crowed or church bells tolled, bakers were already hard at work. Their day often started around midnight, when most of the town was fast asleep. The quiet streets were cold and still, but inside the bakehouse, flames crackled, flour dust hung in the air, and the rhythm of kneading began. Medieval bread wasn't made on a whim. It required precise timing and a practiced hand. Bakers relied on sourdough starters, carefully nurtured fermenting dough that gave rise and flavor to the loaves. There were no commercial yeasts. Everything was done by feel, smell, and experience. The flour was often coarse, ground at a local mill, and carried its own unique character based on region, season, and grain quality. Some bakers even mixed in bran, barley, or beans to stretch their flour supplies. Water was drawn from wells or public fountains. Everything had to be measured and mixed by hand, often in the dim light of oil lamps or candles. The mixing trough was usually wooden, and the dough had to be kneaded until it reached the right texture, a task that required strength and repetition. The oven, usually a large domed brick structure, had to be heated long before baking. Bakers would burn bundles of wood inside until the walls radiated enough heat to bake several batches of bread. Ashes were raked out carefully, and the oven floor cleaned with a damp cloth or a wooden peel before the loaves were slid in. By the time the town stirred, the baker's first loaves were already out of the oven. The smell of warm bread filled the air. It was the scent of sustenance, of daily survival. For many in the medieval world, bread was the cornerstone of every meal. But for the baker, it was just the beginning. Deliveries had to be made, customers served, and records kept. And once the ovens cooled and the counters cleared, there was little time to rest, because tomorrow's dough would need mixing before the moon set again. In medieval towns, the baker's work never truly ended. 21. The tools and types of bread. To master the daily grind of medieval baking, a baker needed more than just flour and fire. They relied on a trusted set of tools, each shaped by generations of craftsmanship. The bakehouse itself was often a simple stone or timber-framed structure, but inside, it was a specialized world. Every item had a purpose, and efficiency could mean the difference between profit and punishment. The heart of any bakery was the oven. Typically made of clay or brick, these were dome-shaped and massive, designed to retain heat for hours. Heating the oven wasn't quick. Bundles of wood, often oak or beech, were burned inside until the walls radiated the ideal temperature. Then the ashes were raked out and the bread loaded using a peel, a long-handled wooden paddle that allowed bakers to slide loaves deep into the hot chamber without burning themselves. The kneading trough was another essential item, usually carved from a single block of wood or built from heavy planks. These troughs were wide and low, allowing bakers to lean into their work. In the medieval world, bread was more than food. It was the foundation of every meal and a marker of social class. What you ate said a great deal about who you were. The wealthiest citizens, nobles, clergy, and prosperous merchants demanded the finest bread, known as manchette or white bread. Made from finely sifted wheat flour, this bread was soft, pale, and expensive. For townsfolk and tradesmen, revel or wheaten bread was the standard. Still made from wheat, it was less refined, slightly darker, and more nutritious. But for the poor, the labourers, peasants, and beggars, there was maslin or black bread, often made from a mix of rye, barley, oats, and whatever else was available. This bread was dense, coarse, and sometimes bitter. 22. The laws and dangers of baking. Being a baker in medieval Europe was not just a matter of skill, it was also a matter of law. Bread was considered so essential to life that its production was heavily regulated by local authorities and trade guilds. For a baker, failing to follow the rules didn't just mean bad business. It could mean public humiliation, loss of livelihood, or even imprisonment. In most towns and cities, guilds controlled the profession. They established strict standards for the weight, size, and ingredients of bread, and these standards weren't optional. Beyond the guilds, municipal authorities also monitored bread quality. In England, for instance, the assize of bread and ale, a law dating back to the 13th century, dictated exactly how much bread a customer should receive for a set price. Officials known as bread weighers or ale tasters conducted surprise inspections and reported violators. Punishment for breaking bread laws could be dramatic. Some bakers were pilloried, locked into public stocks where they were mocked or pelted with stale bread. Others were forced to parade through town with substandard loaves strung around their necks. These rules weren't just about fairness, they were about survival. Running a medieval bakehouse wasn't just demanding, it was dangerous. Fire was both a necessity and a constant threat. Ovens had to reach incredibly high temperatures to bake dense loaves, and maintaining that heat meant burning large quantities of wood, often in enclosed spaces made of timber, thatch, or stone. Most bakehouses were constructed with a large domed oven built from clay or brick, positioned against an outer wall to allow for airflow and loading. To heat it, bakers lit a roaring fire inside the oven itself. But even a moment's carelessness could lead to catastrophe. Embers could escape, thatched roofs could ignite, and in densely packed towns and cities, a bakehouse fire could spread with terrifying speed. For this reason, many towns required that bakehouses be located on the outskirts or built with specific fire-resistant materials. Bakers also faced health risks. Prolonged exposure to heat and smoke took a toll on the lungs and skin. The heavy lifting of flour sacks and kneading of massive batches of dough wore down the body over time. Burns were common on arms, hands and faces, earned while loading and unloading hot loaves with long wooden peels. Some cities had communal bakehouses, especially in poorer neighborhoods. Families would prepare dough at home and bring it to a central oven managed by a professional baker. While this system saved fuel and reduced fire hazards in private homes, it introduced its own risks. Loaves could be burned, stolen, or tampered with. 23. Women and the church in baking. While the image of the medieval baker often centers on male guild members and apprentices, women played a critical, if often overlooked, role in the daily production of bread. In many towns and villages, especially outside major cities, women were the primary bakers for both family and community. Their presence in the bakehouse was essential to keeping the ovens hot and the population fed. In rural areas, household baking was typically done by women. They baked for their families using communal ovens or small hearths, and in times of surplus, they might sell loaves at market or from their doorstep. For many women, this side trade in bread offered a rare source of independent income. In cities too, widows of bakers were often permitted to continue their husbands' businesses, sometimes becoming successful bakery owners in their own right. Guilds were usually male-dominated, but not entirely exclusive. In certain regions, especially in parts of Germany and France, female bakers were formally recognized. Women could inherit licenses, run bakeries, and train apprentices, including daughters or nieces. Baking also intersected with motherhood and caretaking. A woman who could bake well was seen as capable and respectable, keeping her household fed, preserving traditions, and passing down knowledge. In many families, recipes and baking techniques were handed down from mother to daughter, like heirlooms. In every corner of medieval society, from noble kitchens to village ovens, women shaped the world through bread. Though history often left them unnamed, their hands were among the first to touch the dough that would nourish entire towns. In the medieval world, bread was also sacred. Few institutions influenced bread making more than the church, which not only consumed vast quantities of bread, but also shaped its symbolism, regulation, and distribution. In monasteries, cathedrals, and village chapels alike, bread was a symbol of life, sacrifice, and divine presence. At the heart of this connection was the Eucharist, the Christian rite in which bread became the body of Christ. The preparation of this bread, often called the host, was subject to strict guidelines. Only the finest white wheat flour could be used, and it had to be unleavened. In monasteries, specific monks were assigned to this holy duty, baking in silence, often at night, in special ovens. But the church's relationship with bread went far beyond ritual. Monasteries were among the largest landowners and food producers in medieval Europe. Many ran their own bakehouses, producing vast amounts of bread for the monks, their workers, and guests. The daily monastic diet typically included multiple servings of bread paired with cheese, ale, or pottage. For the poor, monasteries also served as lifelines, distributing alms bread to beggars and travelers who waited at the gates. 24. The politics of bread. In the medieval world, bread was deeply entwined with power. For rulers, mayors, guildmasters, and kings, controlling the price, supply, and quality of bread was as important as maintaining order. Because bread was the staple food for most of the population, often making up 70% or more of a person's diet, its availability was directly linked to political stability. The most visible way this played out was through price controls. Cities and kingdoms established official rates for bread through laws like the assize of bread and ale in England, which tied the price of a loaf to the current cost of grain. If grain prices rose due to poor harvests, drought, or war, bakers were expected to adjust the size of their loaves, not the price. This meant that during times of scarcity, bakers had to produce smaller loaves for the same price, often cutting into their own profits. But if a baker was caught short-changing customers or selling loaves below the legal weight, the punishment could be harsh. Authorities saw cheating as not just theft, but a betrayal of the public trust. Bread riots were among the most feared expressions of unrest. When bread became scarce or unaffordable, mobs could form quickly. In such cases, bakers might be accused of hoarding flour or favouring the wealthy. Entire shops could be looted and records destroyed. To maintain peace, city officials would sometimes seize grain stocks or subsidize bread to prevent starvation and protest. Because of its centrality to life, bread became a tool of both charity and control. Rulers handed out bread during public celebrations or religious festivals to win favor with the people. In castles, lords ensured their retainers and servants had ample supplies, reinforcing loyalty. And in towns, a steady stream of affordable bread was seen as the mark of good governance. In medieval politics, bread wasn't just food, it was power. And the baker stood at the intersection of hunger and authority. Though rarely named in chronicles or praised in songs, the medieval baker left behind a legacy that shaped the very foundation of everyday life. In a world of castles and cathedrals, kings and knights, it was the humble baker who fed the people. And while their work was done in darkness, before the town ever woke, its impact touched every household. The baker's influence extended beyond the ovens and into the cultural fabric of medieval society. From birth to death, bread accompanied every stage of life. It was present at baptisms, shared during weddings, offered in mourning, and honoured at church altars. Every loaf baked carried with it centuries of tradition, belief, and survival. The skills of the baker were passed down through generations, often within families or apprenticeships. Techniques were taught by hand and by repetition. How to feel when dough was ready. How to read the oven's heat without a thermometer. How to stretch flour in lean times without sacrificing quality. These traditions were deeply rooted in place and community. A baker in one region might favour rye and oats, while another relied on barley or imported wheat. Every town had its own flavour. Over time, as cities grew and trade expanded, the role of the baker evolved. By the late Middle Ages, commercial bakeries became more common, and baking began to shift from small household craft to full-fledged industry. Innovations like windmills and watermills improved flour production, and better road systems helped grain move from farms to markets more efficiently. Despite this progress, the essential rhythm of baking remained unchanged: rise, knead, shape, fire, feed. It was a cycle as old as civilization, and the medieval baker stood as its quiet custodian. Even today, echoes of their work survive in languages around the world. The word for companion derives from Latin companies, with bread, a reminder that sharing bread meant sharing life. The guilds that once regulated bakers paved the way for modern food safety standards, and the communal ovens of medieval villages laid the foundation for today's neighbourhood bakeries. In the end, the medieval baker's legacy is not just in the loaves they made, but in the sustained life of a community. Through flour, fire, and faith, they fed more than bodies. They nourished entire societies. And with that, our journey through the hidden corners of history comes to a close. Tonight, we've gone far beyond the marble statues and grand speeches of Rome, uncovering the daily struggle and surprising resilience of the women who kept the city's economy and gossip alive. We learned about the ancient PR strategies of Roman prostitutes, from wearing a distinct toga to advertising their services through wall graffiti. We also saw how essential the Viking lechnia was, using plants like yarrow to staunch bleeding and angelica to fight infection in a world without modern medicine. We followed the incredible, faith-driven journey of Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who defied all expectations to crown a king and become a national martyr. And finally, we explored the dangerous yet vital work of the medieval baker, who faced legal penalties and fire hazards to provide the very foundation of daily sustenance for their communities. Each of these stories reminds us that history isn't just about famous battles and powerful rulers. It's about the everyday people whose lives, labours, and beliefs shaped the world in countless, often unseen ways. The Roman sex worker, the Viking healer, the medieval baker, their stories are woven into the very fabric of our past, just waiting to be told. Until next time, this is Golden Chonk, reminding you to listen closely to the whispers of history. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with ancient stories.